Greetings and peace. Thank you for taking the time to view our new video presentation at the Ministry of the Real Truth. Today we are going to take a look at the Assyrian and Hebrew Hymns of Praise by Charles Gordon Cumming, which makes a comparison between the Assyrian and Hebrew Psalms, the poetry and the hymns, and where they actually originate from. A brief history: the Assyrian and Hebrew Hymns of Praise by Charles Gordon Cumming, AMS Press Incorporated, New York, NY. One 0003, 1966, copyright 1934, reprinted with the permission of the original publisher, manufactured in the United States of America, dedicated to this guy, Richard J.H. Goodhill. Note: Professor Cumming has chosen a most interesting subject upon which to write a comparison of the Assyrian and the Hebrew Hymns of Praise. He has spent a number of years developing his theme and has produced a book which Charles Gordon Cumming, I guess, has was commending heartily to the attention of scholars who are interested in this field. Of course, we do not possess all the hymns written by the Assyrian poets, nor have we all those produced by the old Hebrew songsters, but we can certainly have sufficient to make it possible for us to form a just idea of their character and of their beauty. And that's stated by Richard Goodhill. Foreword. It was the author's original intention to add to this book a translation of all the important Assyrian hymns, for a bringing together of hymns now scattered through many books and periodicals would be a very real service to Old Testament scholarship. Such a task, however, calls for the knowledge and skill of the thoroughly competent Assyriologist. It is hoped that the list of texts and translations appended to this book may make it easier for any interested reader to locate and carry further the study of any particular hymn. In the case of the Hebrew Psalms, some slight confusion may be spared the reader if he recognizes that the numbering of the verses is that of the Hebrew text, which differs slightly in certain psalms from that of the English translations. Charles Gordon Cumming, Bangor Theological Seminary, Bangor, Maine, USA, December 1933. Contents within the book that you can look forward to: bibliography, text and translations of Assyrian hymns, selected bibliography in the indexes. Division 1, the Hebrew Hymns of Praise. Chapter 1, Hebrew Psalms which are not hymns. The Book of Psalms is no longer to be regarded by Old Testament scholars as an isolated phenomenon. Similar religious poetry is found not only in the narrative and prophetic portions of the Old Testament, in the Apocrypha in the New Testament, but also in the literatures of Egypt, Babylonia, Persia, India and Greece. Indeed, wherever religion really develops beyond the primitive stages, it expresses itself in poetry, and we get something comparable to the Hebrew Psalms. One primary fact, then, to be considered in the study of the Old Testament Psalms is that they are only the surviving fragments of the religious poetry of a race, and that they have been preserved partly by reason of the literary merit that made it difficult for them to be forgotten, and partly by reason of the fact that they happen to be included in the songbooks of the sanctuaries. One must accordingly bear constantly in mind the larger literature of which they were a part, and employ to a legitimate degree the imagination in order to rightly comprehend the life out of which the Psalms have come, and to see in any true perspective the significance of the surviving psalms. Furthermore, it is now to be clearly recognised that the careful philological study of words and sentences and the further effort to determine the date and authorship of the psalms, while always indispensable, are yet inadequate methods of procedure. It is true that again and again, fixing with philological accuracy the meaning of a word or clause is a clue to the understanding of a psalm. Yet to arrive at any just appreciation of the psalms, it is absolutely necessary to classify them scientifically on the basis of their similarities and dissimilarities, and so to arrange them in the species or groups into which they naturally fall. It is then possible to compare psalm with psalm within the species, fixing as nearly as possible the type and noting every variation from the type. In this way, the eye of the reader is open to the originality and literary beauty of particular psalms, which originality and literary beauty are in turn the expression of the uniqueness and power of the psalmist's spiritual experience. It may also be suggested that another principle of investigation should prove fruitful, namely an attempt to arrange the groups of psalms and the individual psalms within the groups according to the principle of development from the lower to the higher stages of religious experience. Of course, opinions may and do differ as to what is highest in religion, but the student of religion may never cease in his effort to find the line of development and to determine the highest. Since then, the Psalms are almost exclusively religious literature, and since the supreme motive for studying them is to gain the more complete understanding of religion, it is necessary to arrange the Psalms in ascending order so that one can more readily appraise the worth of religion in them and determine and properly appreciate that which is most precious. Finally, a further source of enlightenment and a valuable standard of appraisal has been neglected unless the Old Testament Psalms in their respective groups are compared with the Psalms of Egypt, Babylonia, Persia, India and Greece. Many decades have passed since a succession of studies first pointed out striking similarities between the Hebrew and the Babylonian so-called penitential Psalms. Recent commentaries on the Psalms, such as Sturck's in 1911 and Kittle's in 1916, have printed in the appendices a number of Egyptian and Babylonian Psalms, but the comparative method has not yet been widely and thoroughly applied. An immense amount of work yet remains to be done in comparative study of the religious poetry of the differing literatures. Species must be compared with species, prayer of supplication with prayer of supplication, prayer of thanksgiving with prayer of thanksgiving, affirmation of faith with affirmation of faith, hymn of praise with hymn of praise, and teaching psalm with teaching psalm. Before Hebrew hymns of praise, however, can be properly studied, the relationship of the hymns to the other groups that make up Hebrew religious poesy ought to be understood. Consideration must first be given, therefore, to the different groups of psalms to be found in the Hebrew Psalter. Psalms of lamentation and petition. It has been suggested that the psalms ought to be classified in groups and that the groups ought to be arranged in an ascending order. According to the stage of religious development which they represent. Following this principle, one can quite properly place lowest the psalms of lamentation and petition. The lament in such psalms describes the unhappy plight of the oppressed nation, the persecuted religious community, or the afflicted individual. The petition makes earnest appeal to Yahweh for deliverance. Frequently the petition is reinforced by rather naive considerations such as are calculated to persuade the deity to action. Surely Yahweh ought to be concerned for the glory of his name. Why should the unbeliever say scoffingly, "Where is now your God?" Again, what profit is there to Yahweh in the death of his followers? Assuredly the dead in Sheol do not praise him. Most commonly does the psalmist urge that he has long trusted Yahweh that Yahweh is his only hope and that therefore Yahweh cannot fail him. In addition to the lament and the petition, the two most characteristic features of this group, one generally finds the vow. If God will come to the help of the sufferer, he will in turn render some specified service to Yahweh. It may be an animal sacrifice at the sanctuary, or it may be such a spiritual sacrifice of praise and testimony as will turn sinners to Yahweh. Yet another common feature of this group is a protestation of confidence that Yahweh will most certainly deliver the suppliant. Frequently it is found near the end of the psalm, and so confident is the sufferer of deliverance that he commonly uses the perfect tense, as if his salvation were already effected. Of the 50 psalms of lamentation and the Psalter, 13 express the petition of the nation or the religious community for Yahweh's deliverance. Psalm 79, 74, 44, 80, 83, 61, 37 and 129 lament the humiliation and suffering endured by the nation at the hands of foreign enemies. 85 and 126 recognize in general terms Israel's affliction and implore Yahweh's mercy. While Psalms 10 and 123 lament the wrongs inflicted upon the pious of the land by the powerful and godless rich. Of these Psalms, 137, 129, 125 and 123 are distinctive both for originality and simplicity of expression, and for sincerity and intensity of feeling. Psalms 137 records the wrongs and the insults received at the hands of Babylonians and Edomites and calls for vengeance upon those nations. Psalm 129, in much the same spirit, remembers Israel's manifold sufferings at the hands of many foes and petitions vindictively for revenge. On the other hand, 125 recalls Yahweh's goodness in restoring the nation from exile and pleads with coincidence for a further manifestation of his favour, while in 123 the contempt of the rich and the proud causes the pious to look with humble and childlike confidence to the God of mercy. Undoubtedly, greater far than any of the preceding Psalms in Psalms 90 is Psalms 90, which, transcending the limitations of the nation and the sect, laments the brevity and troubled nature of human life, and pleads for some knowledge of the plan of the eternal God, some permanency for human efforts, some small measure of happiness in life's brief day. To this group of national prayers of lamentation and petition ought possibly to be added Psalm 67. There is here, to be sure, no lament, but verses 2 and 3 are a petition for the coming of Yahweh's salvation to earth, and verses 4, 5 and 6 may also be understood as a petition for the establishment of divine government upon earth. May people praise thee, O God, may all peoples praise thee, may nations be glad and sing for joy, for thou shalt judge peoples righteously and govern nations upon earth. Verses 7 and 8 are then simply a positive expression of confidence that the prayer just uttered is to be answered and God's supreme blessing received. The psalm is not then an eschatological hymn of praise, but rather an eschatological prayer. Psalms 20 and 72 have distinctive positions in this group, since each offers up a petition in behalf of the king. In Psalms 20, the king had apparently presented his offerings and sacrifices at the sanctuary, and the priest prays in verses 2 to 6 that God will remember the king's sacrifices and grant him help in the day of trouble and all his heart's desires. Naturally, in the case of a king, the chief concern is that he should be victorious over his enemies whenever war should come. In verse 7, the priest, possibly informed by some sign that the sacrifice had indeed been accepted by Yahweh, gives positive assurance that the prayer has been answered. Now I know that Yahweh will save his anointed. Verse 8 reaffirms faith in Yahweh as mightier than horse or chariot, while verse 9 again predicts victory over the enemy. The psalm concluded in verse 10 as it began with a petition for the king. Psalm 72 might be fitted into the coronation service, being then the prayer offered for a just and successful reign. This would mean translating the successive sentences of the psalm from verse 1 to verse 11 and from verse 15 to 17 as petitions. Thus verse 2 would be translated. The remaining 37 Psalms of lamentation, or almost 1/4 of the Psalter, arise out of the distress of the individual. The most common misfortune is sickness, Psalms 13, 6, 88, 70, 39, 77, and 102. Accordingly, the petition is that the afflicted one may be saved from death by Yahweh's merciful power. Together with sickness, there is usually the bitter complaint against the wicked enemies, Psalms 3, 13, 70, 64, 147, 55, 109. It is, of course, altogether understandable that men should be alienated from a sick person, regarding him as justly smitten of God and afflicted, and that such men should in turn be regarded by the sick man as enemies. It is also possible that in some instances, as in Psalms 22 and 69, it may be a matter of religious persecution. On the other hand, the language used in a number of Psalms, 13, 70, 64, 147, 55, 57, 59, 109, rather strongly suggests that the enemies are practices of black magic and art familiar to every land unilluminated by modern scientific knowledge. Yet in a considerable number of these psalms, it is Yahweh himself who has sent the affliction. When this is the case, the psalmist may do either of two things. He may acknowledge his misfortune to be a just punishment for his sin, and accordingly petition for forgiveness and deliverance, Psalms 38, 88, 39 and 102. Or he may affirm his innocence and demand deliverance as a matter of justice, Psalms 26, 7, 17, 59, 71. Of all the individual psalms of lamentation, unquestionably the three finest are 51, 42, 43 and 130. Psalms 51 has but one simple clause referring to physical distress, that the bones which thou hast broken may rejoice, and is remarkable for its profound consciousness of guilt and its strong conviction that cleansing and regeneration and righteous life can only be achieved by divine mercy and divine redemptive power. As for Psalms 42 to 43, there is expressed a language of haunting beauty, both an intense thirst for the presence of God and the awakening realization of a something of superior worth in man that can only be satisfied by the experience of God. This would seem to be the road along which the Hebrew ultimately arrived at, the consciousness of his own supreme worth and immortality. Yet possibly the rarest of these psalms, both for simplicity of expression and depth of religious insight, is 130. The psalmist who waits for God more than they who watch for the morning. Has an amazingly profound consciousness of sin expressed in the words, if iniquities thou shouldst record, O Yahweh, Lord, who could stand? And likewise a sublime conception of God's mercy, but with thee is forgiveness, that thou mayest be revered. Psalms of testimony and thanksgiving. Okay, it's got a lot of information there in regards to Psalms 116, 30, 32, 138, 66, 21, 18, 118, 103. And then Psalms 116, testimony of a man who has been sick unto death, and so forth. Okay. A lot of information there on that. Psalms of faith, Psalms 9, Psalms 27, Psalms 11, 62, 63, 92, and so forth. In Psalms 91 verses 1 and 2 state the general truth that the man who trusts God is happy. Blessed is the man who dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High, who abideth under the shadow of the Almighty, who saith of Yahweh, my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust. Psalms 46. Yahweh of hosts is with us, a fortress for us is the God of Jacob, and so forth. And you've got teaching or wisdom psalms. In Hebrew sanctuary hymns of praise. The praise of Yahweh shall my mouth speak, and let all flesh bless his holy name forever and ever. Let everything that breatheth praise Yahweh, praise ye Yahweh, and so forth. Plenty more there. For good is Yahweh unto everlasting, his mercy, and to all generations his faithfulness.